all of the experiences and the wisdom of this young gentleman next to me, he won't mind me saying that, has been put into this rather amazing book.
When I first had this crazy idea in my head about wanting to get a job in a recording studio, and it's predominantly full of a bunch of anecdotes. When I came into the business in early 1970, I had the pleasure and good fortune of working with a lot of old school engineers. I got a phone call from Sally Whiteman, who was the studio manager, and she said, "I know it's your night off, Digby, but you've got to come in." I was involved in recording the whole of the backing track as well as the solo for one of my all-time favourite Zeppelin tracks, Stairway to Heaven. Led Zeppelin recorded a lot of Zepp 3 and Zepp 4 at the Basing Street, Island Records Basing Street Studios in West London.
He's not going to tell us all the secrets because this is for you to get hold of.
In fact, between me and Bob, we assisted on pretty much most of Zepp 3 and Zepp 4. I was blessed to have the opportunity to work alongside, for instance, Andy Johns, whose resume and CV I go into detail in the book, as with his older brother Glyn Johns. And then I later went on to actually sit in the driving seat, Free at Last, Heartbreaker. And either by default or design, I'm not sure, I found myself states bound. Guitar legend Albert Lee, Pete Gavin on drums, Charlie Hodges on bass, guitar, fiddle, piano, later one half of the famous Chaz and Dave duo. And we went from West Coast to East Coast, North to South, back to the East Coast, back to the West Coast. It goes back to the beginning again, as all things do. I was missing the weather, I was missing the whole LA SoCal lifestyle. And I was, as I mentioned in the book, I was suffering from studio burnout. But before too long, I was approached by somebody from the Island Records West Coast office and was in the studio with a lovely guy, Spencer Davis, producing a record, and I got Chris Blackwell, the Island Records boss, introduced me to all the Island Records team out in LA. So it seemed like I couldn't escape the recording studio. And before too long, I was in the studio making records with many people. As importantly for me, working with one of the finest record producers of the modern era, Mr. Muff Winwood. And where better to come up for air than in the orange blossom, fragrant atmosphere of Southern California, you know. Lionel introduced me to a good friend of his who was an expat living in Los Angeles by the name of Rod Stewart. Hilarious tales, if I say so myself in all honesty, about some of the football matches and some of the people we played against. For a brief 2-week period, the sun didn't set on my hit records, and I was involved in the recording of 5 of the tracks that went on the Glow album, the bulk of which we recorded at Abbey Road Studios in London, which in itself is a story that's told in there, a dream come true. And the Yellow Monkey album went to #1 on the whole of the Southeast Asia and the East Coast of Japan, and the Reef album went to #1 in the UK at exactly the same time. I can only describe it as magical because that's what it is. It's in a magical part of the world in the West Country, the banquet of a meal. And Peter Gabriel in attendance would come and chat with us and ask us if everything was okay in the studios, anything you need, let me know. It was literally around the corner from the studio. So down this quiet, unlit country lane I do walk. All along the stairway were watercolour pictures of steam engines that had faces on the front of them. Then the penny dropped. I was staying in the Thomas the Tank Engine house. And I always remember I was always told by one of my early mentors that if it doesn't matter whether you're in the studio with Led Zeppelin or you're in the studio with Joe Bloggs and his local band, you observe the same attention to detail and you observe the same quality control and apply yourself just the same as you would in both instances. So semi-retired, maybe, working just as hard as ever and loving it more each day.
Make sure you get a copy of this amazing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing.